I'm not gonna lie, Nvidia kind of cooked with this new driver release. If you don't know, Nvidia did leak their own 570 driver online a couple days ago, and some YouTubers have been reviewing it. And I was like, well, I need to review it and test out some games, do some benchmarking with some graphs, just show my experience with an RTX 2060 on this 570 driver, and to look at some of the new things that they have brought over for the Wayland experience on the Wayland desktop. So the Nvidia graphics card that I've had for around 6 or so years now is this Nvidia RTX 2060. I think it's called a Ventus. I'm pretty sure 6 gigabytes of VRAM, and it doesn't really run that great with AAA games, like the latest AAA games, but it still holds up in a lot of games that we all play today, except that this thing does like to get extremely hot. So I did have to point a bloody actual fan into my case to make sure that this thing doesn't really get to 90 plus degrees, because that's what it gets to, and that's not really healthy, I would say, and the fans are just at the max. But this is the GPU that I decided to try this 570 driver on. Now, of course, I don't have the GPU plugged in at the moment. My AMD card is plugged in. That is just because I wanted to play my other games and get better performance, because my AMD card is just more powerful in general versus the RTX 2060, and it doesn't overheat. I switched it over last night to play some games, and now this is just how it's set up right now. So what is new in this 570 driver release first? Well, they did fix a bug that caused the Nvidia settings control panel to crash when querying a VRR attributes on some monitors. Updated the Nvidia settings control panel to use the NVML rather than NV control to control GPU clocks and fan speed. This allows related functionality to work when using Wayland, where the NV Control X extension is not available. Note that as a result, some operations which were previously available to unprivileged users due to privileges of the X server may now require elevated privileges. So this feature I can't show off even with the drivers installed and the GPU installed, because the drivers that were provided on Cassie's OS don't provide the Nvidia settings application. So I can't show that, but it is in the changelog, so it should be there, and I'm pretty sure some other reviewers on other distros were able to install the Nvidia drivers manually from the Nvidia CUDA repos, and they were able to use the Nvidia settings application. So those reviewers should know if it actually is working or not, but it should be, and this is the changelog, so it should be working. So that's really awesome to see that Nvidia has implemented another important feature that was not working on the Wayland desktop, and now should be working on the Wayland desktop. Now, one big one that I personally really wanted for so long that never arrived before I switched to my AMD GPU, and that was VRR on multiple monitors. I have 3 monitors, 2 are 144 Hz. One of them has VRR, and I have a 60 Hz monitor as well on the left. And when I switched over to AMD, I was able to use VRR on a Wayland desktop like KDE Plasma, and it was really nice. But on Nvidia, when testing like the 555 driver, or the 560 driver, or the 565 driver, they all ran okay on Wayland, but there was the fact that I couldn't use VRR on multiple monitors. And if I unplugged my monitors, my right one and my left one, and I just used the main monitor that has VRR, it would work. But now you can actually use VRR with multiple monitors plugged in, because Wayland is able to do that. And so I did test this out, and well, how do we know if VRR is actually working? Well, some games, when they like to load their shader cache and their FPS is capped to the monitor, it will start to flicker. It's a common thing with VRR. Some monitors are not really great at doing VRR, so it will just flicker at weird FPS ranges, and it likes to do that in like Overwatch 2, the finals, I think, and Marvel Rivals. Usually when you just start up the game, if you launch Overwatch for the first time, it's going to load shader cache, and the FPS is locked to 60, and yeah, it makes the monitor flicker. So that's one way of knowing if VRR is working. And the other one is that your cursor in some games will be capped to the FPS of the game. So you can just like move your cursor around, and if you in the menu, let's say like the FPS is like fluctuating at that point, and you move your cursor around, you'll feel your cursor being put down to whatever the FPS is in the game. That's another way of knowing if VRR is actually working or not. And the other one is very similar to the game one, which is if you just do a full screen video on YouTube, it should clock down to whatever the video FPS is doing. So if it's like 30 FPS, you should notice that your cursor won't be as smooth. And then when you unfull screen it, your cursor is going to be extremely smooth again because it's going to be capped at your monitor's refresh rate. So really awesome that VRR with multiple displays is finally here on the 570 driver. Like, it's actually here. People are all like, oh, the 570 is going to bring VR. Yeah, it's here. And that's awesome that it's finally here. And some other things like added an application profile to improve performance on Indiana Jones in the Great Circle, added an application profile to resolve a corruption issue on Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Assassin's Creed Mirage. That's awesome that they've been fixing some issues with some games, which they all run through Proton. So that just shows you that they are actually fixing game issues. Implemented support for the VKKHR incremental present extension. If we do look this up and we see what it is, if we look up what this Vulkan extension does, it says here, allowing an application to specify a list of rectangular modified regions of each image to present. This should be used in situations where an application is only changing a small portion of the presentable images within a swap chain, since it enables the presentation engine to avoid wasting time presenting parts of the service that have not changed. I personally don't understand what this means, but if you look at the contributors, a lot were from Nvidia, some were from Google, Samsung, and ARM even. So that's cool. If you use this Vulkan extension, you'd be waiting for that, then that is finally here. Another one is fix a bug that could cause some Vulkan applications to crash when responding to window resize events. So personally for me, that never really occurred, but that's also really cool to see. Updated GPU overclocking control to be available by default in Nvidia settings for GPU boards that support programmable clock control. Previously, this was only available when bit 3 was set in the coolbits xconfig option. So that's awesome that that is there. Disabled a power saving feature on ADA or ADA and above generation GPUs for surfaces allocated with the DRM dumb buffers API. For example, when using a DRM FB dev, the power saving feature could cause black screens for DRM dumb buffers, which was front buffer rendering instead of KMS flips. Okay, so if you do have those older GPUs, gonna use no longer power saving if you use the FB dev option. Is that what I'm reading here? So that's interesting. Fix a bug that could cause some multi-threaded OpenGL applications, for example, Civilization 6, to crash when running on WAYLAND. Another game that has been fixed because of some crash with multi-threaded OpenGL applications that it would crash on WAYLAND. That is awesome to see. Also, Nvidia just, fixing some games. I like to see that. Added support for queuing dynamic boost status via the power file in proc driver Nvidia GPUs style. Okay, that's interesting. Cool. Enabled 32-bit compatibility support for the Nvidia GBM backend. That's really good to see. And then added a new kernel module parameter called conceal VRR caps to the Nvidia ModeSet kernel module. This parameter may be used to enable usage of features on some displays, such as ULMB, ultra low motion blur, which are incompatible with VRR. See the Direct Rendering Manager kernel mode setting, DRM KMS chapter of the README for further information. So if you do have an ultra low motion blur feature on your monitor, it will be incompatible with VRR, so you have to use this kernel mode set for your Linux kernel, so then it's actually going to fix this problem. They also fixed a bug that caused games to crash with the Proton enable NGX updater environment variable was set to a value of 1. I can't remember what that environment variable does, but if you do use it, now your games won't crash, and some other things that aren't really important to, like regular users, I would say. Added user share Nvidia files.d sandbox utilities file list.json, which lists all the driver files used by container runtime environments such as the Nvidia container toolkit in en route. So that's something. Added support for system D suspend, then hibernate method of system sleep. This feature requires system D version 248 or newer. So that's really good to see. I remember people in the comments when I posted the changelog that they were really excited to see that because of like system suspend and all that. So that's really cool to see that system D can also do that. That's pretty cool. They also did enable the Nvidia DRM FB dev = 1 option by default. When supported by the kernel and the Nvidia DRM mode set = 1 option is enabled, Nvidia DRM will replace the system's frame buffer console with one driven by DRM. So that's really cool because I did test out FB dev to see if there was any differences with performance, and there actually was a difference in some gaming performance. So that's really cool that has now been enabled by default. That might be why maybe we're seeing, soon I'll show you guys some benchmarks where Nvidia 570 does win in some benchmarks. And maybe that is the reason for it. Implemented a feature that allows low latency display interrupts to be serviced even when the system is under heavy contention. This is especially useful for reducing stuttering when using virtual reality. That's a good feature to bring, or fix to bring. That's really cool because like I know people who have an Nvidia card and they use VR and maybe it's not that great for certain things, like little things like this. So that is really awesome to see. But it does say here, if this is actually pointing to this one, it says this feature is experimental and disabled by default. So that's a bit sad, but I guess you could enable it, or are they talking about this one? I don't know. But this feature can be enabled by loading nvidia.co with the nvreg registry d words = rm interlocking mode = 1 kernel module parameter. So if you do want to use this, you need to use this kernel module parameter, which for a regular user might be a bit confusing and like how do I enable that type of stuff? That might be a bit hard. Now, I would say that this 570 driver release is awesome, I would say. It's actually like really just amazing to see that the Nvidia developers, Nvidia Linux developers, not the Windows Nvidia developers or Nvidia themselves, just the Linux Nvidia developers. They seem to be improving a lot recently with their changelogs for one, because I remember a while ago, Nvidia wasn't even posting the right Linux changelogs for the drivers on the main website. And now they are. They're doing that properly. They also posted about the WAYLAND stuff they want to get done and fixed, which is really awesome to see. And just being a lot more transparent with everything, and I really do like that, instead of just being like sitting in the dark, not really knowing what's next necessarily. Seeing, like the VRR with multiple monitors, like they're actually like doing the work to get this stuff supported, and I think, next month and a half, whenever the next Nvidia driver releases, it's going to be even better probably, I bet. I'm not going to like overhype things, but I bet the next Nvidia driver that does come out, it's going to have more improvements and more features that get on par with at least the WAYLAND features that you get with an AMD card or an Intel card when using it on the desktop. You'll actually like get those features properly, which there isn't much left, to be honest. So, it's already pretty damn good. But the other one is about benchmarks. Does the 570 driver beat the 565 driver? Now, before these benchmarks start, the Nvidia driver, the 570, is unreleased, or well, it's available in the CUDA repos on the official Nvidia site, but it's not available like fully available on like every major like either rolling distro or distros like Fedora, for example. So I would say that, when the driver actually fully releases, we'll get to see if 570 and 565 actually do beat each other. But I did do a bunch of benchmark testing yesterday. I literally did it all day. I did muck up my first round of testing because I decided to use the open Nvidia driver. So I had to redo my testing with the full proprietary one, because people were saying the full proprietary driver is the one that performs better versus the open one. And that did seem to be the case. But if we do look here, like the first one is WRC10. This game runs by default in VKD3D/DirectX 12. So we're going to be looking at mostly DirectX 12 games here to see if the 570 driver has any improvements on that side. But there is a few DXV games that we do have here. So WRC10, the graphics was at very high, also was in DirectX 12, and the post-processing settings was mostly on low. So if we do look at the frame timing here, 570, it is spiking a little bit, I would say. Well, 565 is rather low, and it does say less is better, so that's interesting. But if we do go down here to the actual min, max, and average, we can see where the 565 driver has a 97 percentile of 94 and 78. Now, I tried to get this as mostly close as possible. I played the same map, same weather condition, the same car, the same players in that car, and I tried to, when I start the game, I would start the logging of this FPS graph. So basically when the countdown happens, like 3, 2, 1, and you go with the car, that's when I would start the logging. And I tried to go through the track as quickly and try to not crash so that it was like more consistent. And I did this about like 4 or 5 times with 565 and 570 because I crashed a couple times, but also I had to redo the drivers again to try the full proprietary one. And as we can see here, even so, the 565 does have a better 97 percentile with 94 versus 78. So that's a bit interesting. I would say the WRC10 on DirectX 12, even on I think AMD, a bit weird with its frame timing. I'll show up a video of like the comparison between VKD3D or WRC10 versus DXVK, and it is just a night and day difference when it comes to the frame timing and the FPS. Like you gain like 30 FPS if you switch to DirectX 11/DXVK mode. It's that much when it comes to the FPS that you gain. So at least with this, the 565 does seem to do a bit better, and that might be because of the optimizations with the Caches OS driver also that's being applied. I'm unsure about that. But if we do go to the other benchmarks that we have here, we'll just open this up in multiple tabs. And if we do look at Black Myth Wukong, which was a game that was tested on some other YouTubers that reviewed the 570 driver, and they said they had improvements. Now for me, if we have a look at it, that is mostly true, I would say. It's like margin of error, I would say. My settings for this game was DLSS was at 66% with scaling, and it was at medium settings. And this is the benchmark tool that it goes around the river or whatever every time. And there's not much of an improvement, honestly. It's just like margin of error, in my opinion, at least on my graphics card. Maybe on newer cards it does perform better, but at least for me, it's like, like margin of error, I would say. Like, 36 versus 37, that's not that big of a deal, at least on my GPU. And if we do look at Division 2, which I did enable the DirectX 12 mode instead of running in DirectX 11, we can see that the 565, again, 565 is doing something a bit interesting where, the 97 percentile, 102, and I tried to record this or log the FPS at a certain point at the start, because it points at a plane, like at the wall of the plane, and I tried to log it when it gets a bit further back so that the FPS is a bit more normal, so it's a bit more accurate, you could say. But as you can see here, the 570 driver seems to be holding back in at least Division 2 also, where you're losing 12 FPS here. And when it comes to the 1% mins and the averages also, it's not looking that great for Division 2. Now, of course, there's a DirectX 11 mode for Division 2 also. And personally, I have never run Division 2 in DirectX 12 because it runs better by default in just DirectX 11 itself. So there's no reason to run it in DirectX 12. Maybe that's why it doesn't run that well, not just because of the driver, but because the Division 2, maybe VKD 3D performance hasn't really been looked into for this game because it runs DirectX 11 by default, I'm pretty sure. We have a look at another one though, is Cyberpunk 2077. There's another game that some other YouTubers did test where they saw an improvement, but for me, I'm not seeing an improvement with this. I'm seeing less an improvement, and I always try to log the FPS at the correct time when it starts in that bar, but as you can see here, that's interesting. But like I said, we need to wait for the actual 570 driver to release to really see if there's any improvements with this driver, because technically the 570, I'm pretty sure it's like an enterprise driver. That's what I was seeing when I was doing these benchmarks. It kept showing that it was an enterprise 565 driver. So I'd probably still wait for the driver release to actually see if performance is actually better. But if I'm testing with Cyberpunk, again, the 565 does a really good job. Now, in Batman Arkham Knight, which is a DirectX 11 game, we can see where the 570 driver is actually a little bit better. And it doesn't seem like margin of error with the 97 percentile. It actually seems like a nice difference between the 565 driver. So that's really good to see. And then Helldivers 2, again, the 565 driver does do a better job. And what I did is I just went into the ship and I just ran around. I should run around in the ship for a minute. If we do look at the settings, it is on ultra quality for like the upscaling, and then the graphics is on medium to high. And then same for Batman Arkham Knight, it's all on like max settings. And if we do look at Marvel Rivals, this is another game that is DirectX 12 and is like a newer game that people are playing on Linux. We can see that the 565 driver is still doing a better job than the 570 driver. So again, I don't know why the 570 driver is not really performing that well in DirectX 12 titles. Like I said, I tried to do as many tests as possible with the open driver and the full proprietary driver. And I redid this stuff where if the 570 driver lost, which Marvel Rivals did in the first testing, I would redo the testing just to make sure that then my numbers are correct. And I went into training and I just shot around and I used Moon Knight as the character, and I just kept killing those bots and the like character that stands still, pulling my ult, everything as much as possible to try and just get a good FPS rating on it. And then the last one is the finals. And this one actually did better with the 570. It seems like maybe with the average and the 1% mins, that's actually an improvement. But when it comes to the 97 percentile, that feels like a margin of error. But look, yeah, average and 1% min. That is a lot better, and that's good. That's what we want to see. And I would say that when the 570 driver releases, anyone that like doesn't want to install it manually and wants to wait, I would definitely give it a try yourself. I have heard of some other people who tried the 570 driver and they didn't get performance improvements and they got lost performance. That's what I'm thinking with the driver, is that it's an enterprise driver, so maybe there's going to be an actual other driver release that's going to happen that will fix maybe these issues. Nvidia still has time to like improve things before it actually becomes fully like a stable driver. I mean, this is basically like a beta driver before it actually goes into the different Nvidia branches of drivers. Now, what is left with the Nvidia driver when it comes to features or bugs that happen? Well, the first one is VKD 3D. If I said that correctly, performance improvements. Of course, that's something that's really important, as the my AMD card, Valve has worked extremely hard on trying to improve it for the Steam Deck. So performance with that graphics API works really well in AMD, but Nvidia, it's always just slacking a little bit behind, where there's actually like a big gap when you verse it against Windows. And I think that's one of the main things that is holding back Linux gaming, not just like anti-cheat, but that's one of the reasons, is that Nvidia needs to improve VKD 3D performance, because every time you see benchmarks people doing online, they post a VKD 3D game and they're using Nvidia card and they put it against Windows and Windows beats the hell out of it. But then if you plug in an AMD card and do the same thing, then AMD is like literally like right behind Windows when it comes to performance, or maybe a little bit better, or maybe just like on par. So that is one feature that I would like to see improved, because that is really an important thing to get done. If Nvidia can't get that done, then it will always just be a thing that will be brought up when it comes to Windows versus Linux, as Nvidia performance with DirectX 12 on Linux isn't really that great. Now, the other one was about laptop mux switching, which is going to be improved under Wayland. Nvidia did say that they want to improve that. So hopefully in the next driver releases, we do see a lot more about that, so that the experience you have on a laptop with Wayland is a lot better when it comes to, because mux switching is like kind of like switchable graphics or something, so it's able to decide what gets like displayed on the monitor with like the game or whatever you're launching, and that, like, there's some issues with it on Wayland. While on X11 it works perfectly fine, because the way X11 is designed, they can just like do it, because X11's like really open or something. And then the other one is game scope. Hopefully Nvidia improves that, because game scope on Nvidia does have some issues. And it seems like it is getting better. I saw Bazite post a beta image for Nvidia with like the game mode, Steam Deck mode UI, so people can actually test that out now, and it won't have like any like big issues where you actually can't use game scope. So hopefully that gets improved also. So the question is, for me at least, is would I recommend an Nvidia card on Linux when this 570 driver fully releases? I would say yes. Even though the VKD3 performance hasn't really improved, at least on my GPU, it does seem to be improving overall on a lot of other GPUs. A lot of other YouTubers have said the VKD 3D performance is better, and they've shown off comparisons, and it does seem like it has improved for them. So yeah, I would actually recommend Nvidia on Linux with the proprietary driver. Even though it's a proprietary driver, it's something that you have to live with if you're on Nvidia, and I think that's perfectly fine. If the driver works well and it installs well, and you don't have any major issues, I would say that Nvidia on Wayland now, with with VRR, with the game fixes they're doing, with some of the other things they've brought over with kernel parameters that you can set now, I think Nvidia is in a decent place where you can actually use it for gaming and you'll have a pretty decent time. Now the other one is, will this driver be able to work with the new RTX 50, or I think it's called Blackwell Nvidia GPUs? I don't know about that, because the RTX 50 series haven't like fully released, and the reviewers that review the Nvidia cards, I don't think they have done any Linux benchmarks or to see if it actually works. So that is my conclusion, I would say, with the Nvidia driver. The 570 release is a really good release. I'm really pleased with the experience that I had when I plugged in the GPU. I had no issues booting up the computer, logging in, playing games, switching around my desktop. It felt smooth, it felt snappy. Really good to see that Nvidia is actually improving their drivers at a good pace. So if you guys did enjoy this video, I definitely would give it a like. You can definitely subscribe to the channel, and thank you to my supporters. I'll show a screenshot of you now. Thank you for giving money every single month, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.